Okay, so I think we're live. Let me check on my little meters here. And today we're talking about soundproofing and this VOTech Simplified Live. I'm a few minutes late. I'm a minute late. But we're talking about the concept of soundproofing, which you probably already know this. That was kind of clickbait, since you can't soundproof. There's just technically no such thing, and that's a but in common usage, people that are new to this business will talk about quote soundproofing because they want to reduce the sound in the room, and they don't necessarily know that detail that that's not a real thing that we can do. We cannot soundproof. What we can do is we can end up isolating, we can reduce the reverb, and you can do all sorts of things like that. And up here on the screen, I have a couple things, and let me pull this around just so you can get an idea. So this was this closet right here on the left. This was a walk-in closet that we started with. This is what currently I think my son Donnie is using. And we started with this, it had a double door on it, and we rebuilt all that and took out the shelves and took out shelves that were over here. It goes off to the right some, not a lot, but we took out these shelves. We took out everything out of this little room and we converted it, and it ended up turning out like this. So this room is treated. This wasn't the final. This was the final when I left it. You can barely see over on the left side. There is a acoustic panel there. We've added another one that's off to the side here that you can't see. I think we put one up here at the top now. And point being, I don't really like one material in a room, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But here's the point. You really have two things that you're going to deal with if you're working in the voiceover business. You're going to deal with a concept called dealing with reverb. I want my room to be itself fairly dead, not have reverb in it. We can always add reverb later with the DAWs. That's a trivial process, relatively speaking, especially if you have one of the better, more advanced DAWs. There are cases for sounding more natural, where if we're working against AI, one of the things that people don't know is that I will throw in a couple instances, depending on what my end results need to be, a tiny bit of reverb. Every room that we sit in over our whole life, whether it's our bedroom, our kitchen, our living room, they all have a little bit of reverb. That's just the way, because there are reflective surfaces in those rooms, and so we're used to hearing it. But in a voiceover and an audiobook concept, reverb is our enemy. We are trying to cut it down, which is why people build blanket forts, why people go ahead and do this other thing. And when it comes to soundproofing, the real issue is there's noise, and it's really not noise. Remember that noise is just sound that we don't like for our recordings. A dog barking, yes, it's noise, but it is sound. A buzz that's in our audio, we'll talk about that in a little bit. I'll take some buzz out with RX. And it's not really noise, it's just sound that is unhelpful for our current project, any more than if I was working in the old days when I worked when someone did photography and they were using film. Then when it was being developed, extra light in the room caused problems. So they ended up needing to be in dark rooms and things like that. But point being, there is no such thing as noise. Overall, it's just a different sound, and it's a sound that's unhelpful to what we're doing for voiceover. It's a distraction. A dog bark would be a distraction, a sound that takes our listener out of what we're doing. And what we want to do is get into a room that's quiet and that doesn't have any reverb. Quiet meaning a dog barking or a child crying or a cat meowing in another part of our house or our structure or outdoors is not going to be heard by our listener and distract them from the message we're trying to give. So there is no such thing as soundproofing. There are a few rooms in the world that are hundreds of thousands or millions that get into such a low level of noise that they're crazy. But we're not talking about that. In the average home, and then let's be clear, if someone is in a basement and they have no utilities running in the basement, That is going to be one of the places where you can get a crazy low noise floor is in a basement. Outside of that, people don't realize how noisy the world is until they start recording, and then the microphones pick up all sorts of things, and then they get amplified. And it gets to be quite a mess there. So this was the original closet. This is what it ended up. There's more treatment. We'll talk about foam. We'll talk about a little bit about what is it? Acoustic panels, and then some things we can do with RX. But remember, I titled it soundproofing, and then I added a question mark at some part because I just wanted people to know that's really clickbait. All right, there is no such thing as soundproofing. Because there's always sound in the background. It may be very low. It may be that I don't hear it, you don't hear it, but our dog will hear it. It's there, but my dog's not very critical. He likes me either way. It's more a matter of we want to get the sound level and the distraction level down to a point where nobody notices it. So that's reducing reverb, and that's reducing outside sound beyond our voice. We just want it to pick up our voice. And today I happen to have a fan on. It's 90 degrees here in Southern California, and I'm on a second floor. And so I just decided, if people with good ears or they're running earbuds or they're in a quiet location, you could hear some fan noise in here. And I really could go in. Let me see if on this mic, if I had put in a filter there. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. So let me see if I can get that to come in. And I actually have I have RX9 voice denoiser running in real time here in the background, and so that's just because my software supports that. And so you may or may not hear. You'll probably hear that I have a little fan running, but it's one of those things that this discussion is not that mission critical. Nobody's paying me for it. If I were doing something that was going to be paid, then I wouldn't have a fan running. But don't think I don't care. I do care, but I just decided, yeah. And if I were really doing it, what I could do instead of recording it live, I could broadcast it, and then I could strip out that background fan if I wanted to. I have the tech to do it. And you do too, if you choose to and learn how to use it. So that's fine. We can do that. You can. Oh, good. So Dale just said, just like, oh, yes. Yeah. So Dale, thank you for the feedback about sounds good and looks good. That's always helpful to know. Earlier today, I had a feature on in my broadcast software that would automatically change the mic volume. I tell everyone else to turn that off, but I got a new version of my software and it changed the default. So it was off previously. It turned it on. I didn't notice that it turned it on. I'm doing this live thing, and all of a sudden my volume's changing, and I couldn't figure it out for a bit and found the problem. So that's always good. And Lisa just said, it's like weeds are plants that we don't want in a certain location. Yeah, absolutely. Just because we don't want a dandelion, I'm guessing there's some reason that I do not know that dandelions could be helpful. But somebody thinks they're or some for some reason they're supposed to be around, and different weeds will take over, and they're all over the place. So weeds are plants. Weeds, we just don't want them in our lawn potentially, or we don't want them on our hillside, or we don't want them in a certain location, but they're there for some reason that's totally beyond my pay grade. All right. So it's the same thing here with the sound. And so you can take a room like this, and one of the things that we added in here that's not obvious is we increase the isolation. So since this was a closet as opposed to, say, a blanket fort type concept, we had a closet and we added additional insulation on the inside, additional insulation up on the ceiling, additional isolation. So we added some masks. There was drywall that was added to these walls. We increased the number of layers of drywall that was there. There's some insulation in there. And we just tightened the room dramatically in order to make it much, much quieter, since he has a 1-year-old child now, our grandchild, and he's in Florida, where air conditioner could be running about 2/3 of the year. It could be raining. It rains almost every day, and he still has to record, and he does. So you can mitigate all this stuff, but it is not soundproof. This is a great room. This room, it's amazing what can happen in his house with the combination of air conditioner and child and other things. where he can continue to record. It could be raining out, he could be recording. But there is a point at which if a hurricane were going through, I don't know what the wind speed would be, if it's 30 miles an hour, 20, 10, 200, whatever it is, there's a point where even this room will not stand up to it. There is some sound leakage into this. He has the technology of RX that can take out things too, so that helps as well. So you'll never get to a soundproof room in our situation. It just doesn't happen. But what we can do is we have two things. All this foam that's sitting here, that is about cutting the reverb. This room, you walk in and it sounds insanely calm. It's very dead. And if we ever wanted, we'll add reverb after the fact. And we do add that on some limited cases. And we started with this, and we treated the walls, we treated the ceiling, we treated the floor. There was an extra floor put in here that was floated on here. There's more layers of drywall that were added, and insulation and all sorts of stuff. There's insulation in the ceiling. That ceiling, you can't tell from the pictures just because they're not perfectly to scale. But we dropped the ceiling here because there's insulation up here, because there's a roof. This is on the second floor. And when it rains, that roof gets a lot of sound. And so we built a box within a box. That box does not touch these walls. It does not touch the ceiling. There's a lot of mass that has been added in order to cut the outside sound from getting in here. And it still is not perfect. It's just darn good. Okay. And that's what you're hoping for. There are a few cases where he can't record. I'll bet if our granddaughter stood right outside his door and were screaming her head off, yeah, he'd know about it and he'd have to stop recording. And that's kind of life, you know. Could we increase the amount of mass in the door? Yes, we could have. Could we? And we did put in a solid core door, but we could insulate the where the door jams even more. There's a lot of things we could do if it's worth it. But boy, do you get to a point of diminishing return on this stuff. And some people will get away in some places with just having blankets and a frame that can be a PVC or a 2x4s, PVC, that type of thing. And if somebody wants some information on how to do that kind of stuff and build this kind of thing, we did a seminar, Make Your Recording Space Better, and we showed off what we did for this. We discussed some details, and there's material lists and all sorts of things. It's like $50, $47, and you can get all that stuff. For example, the foam that we used, here it is here. It's on Amazon. You can just stop this, pause this thing, and you can grab. But there's 100 others that you could buy. We ordered this back in 21. I think we might have used a different brand when we went to the second place. But I like these mushrooms. I like their density. They work really well. And then, of course, I love mixing acoustic panels that are that we built custom. We put some fabric over it and then we used rock wool. And I'm not doing a whole seminar on how to build acoustic panels or how much foam you need and the mix between them, but want you to know that we can do it and we can make it happen, and it works really, really well. Is the room too small for bass traps? First off, bass traps in a voiceover context, in my mind, are a total waste, because first, when you think of it, when you're doing instruments, you can have a sustained note. When you're doing voice, it's almost always a total waste of time to have bass traps in a room that's just working voice. What does happen is there are a few rooms that do sound better after a bass trap, but not because it's a bass trap. It's because there's more insulation in the room, and that room needed some more insulation, but it could have not been a bass trap. But I kind of, bass traps end up being one of those things that are more expensive, don't do much if they're just in the corners, not when you're doing voice. There's no sustained notes. I mean, we're not singing. You're not playing bass guitar where you could, or even regular guitar where you could sustain a note that actually could be at a frequency and that stays for more than a fraction of a second. You can't have standing waves if you don't have an original wave that actually is sitting at the same place, or that could build up because of a series of things. So for a whole bunch of reasons, it's a bunch of hooey. People do put bass traps in all sorts of places where they might get some results, but they'll get results because that room could have used some more insulation. But the bass trap itself and what it's designed to do, it's a total misuse of money in my mind. If you need more, you could take that same amount of money and you could get 4 times the panels, and you would get a better end result rather than putting a bass trap in for a voiceover context. Now, if you work in music, if I was working music, totally different point of view, totally different situation going on. If I've got instruments that are recording in there, then I'll start talking about bass traps and that. So that's beyond this discussion, but in my mind, in 99% of the cases, doing a vocal booth where we're doing voiceover, narration, this type of thing, bass traps are a total BS waste of time and money. Okay, so sorry. Anyway, happy to talk about that if you ever want later offline or a different discussion. Leave them alone for now. That same amount of money spent on a couple panels built would get a much better end result, because it's not a real thing. It's just not a real thing for recording a voice. And if you for a bunch of reasons, I'll leave it at that for today. Okay, but ask a question if I missed something. But people do, it's kind of one of those myths where it's almost like soundproofing, where people talk about it. And I do want to acknowledge, you're going to hear a bunch of people talk about the concept of soundproofing, and they don't mean to. I mean, what they mean is they just want to have it quiet, and they don't understand, and they're misusing the terms. It's the other thing that used to drive me crazy. I've got over it, is the concept of mastering an audiobook. It is not mastering. I've mastered records. That's mastering. That's a whole different thing. You're taking what a sound engineer gives you, and you are making minor modifications to keep as much of the original sound as possible, and you are making modifications based on the fact that you're moving to record or CD or a different medium, compared to where it was recorded in the studio, and you want the least amount of change, but you also have to have it, like, if some bass notes would end up causing the record to skip. And so the mastering engineer's job was to deal with the fact that if they took the original recording as the engineer and the producer had envisioned it, and they tried to cut it to a record, it would skip in certain places because certain frequencies cause certain things to happen, which would cause the record to skip. I'll summarize. That's a total, bastardization of that description, and cutting corners on the actual situation. But I've done it, sat with guys that are amazing at it, and it's just a different thing. In audiobooks, we hit some specs. It's not true mastering, but that term has become something that so many people know about. And when they say soundproofing, I just translate now. I know what they mean. I know that they're not right. And you'll see discussions all over the place. If someone says, "Hey, I need to soundproof my room," you'll get 20 people jumping on, including me sometimes. It's soundproofing, you can't soundproof. They really should say, yes, that's a common use term, but it's not accurate. Hey, it ain't gonna happen. Oh, look at this. I didn't even pay attention here. Soundproofing and fire-resistant stone wool insulation bat. So look at this. This company's here. They're telling it's soundproofing insulation. That's BS. It's great marketing, though. But it is common usage. I also like the other one, dial the phone. Hey, you dial your phone? No, you don't. We push buttons. There is no, we don't even push buttons. All right. Sometimes on my smartphone, I think, I'm going to push some buttons. In case, by the way, I held up this visual aid in case you didn't know what a smartphone looked like. But assuming you did, there's still, on many phones, it's still called a dialer. There's no dial on it. You don't dial, and you don't even press buttons. You put your finger on certain spots that pretend they're buttons, and they're not real buttons. They're virtual buttons. All right. So we press on the screen at certain spots, and it looks like buttons, and it looks like whatever. So even dial the phone is common statement that we make, but it's not what we really do. So anyway, even these guys misuse this. And why do they do that? Because consumers associate this sort of thing with soundproofing, and it's just sound reduction. Okay. So we'll get over that in a minute. And then the last thing. So really, there's a couple things you can do. You can put up foam, and you're going to want to cover, I always call it, here's one of my little tests. I call it my squirt gun test. If you remember back in the day, they had these little cheapo squirt guns, and the cheapo squirt guns, I mean, they weren't all that great. They're not these super soaker things that you can get today. There are some high-tech squirt guns these days, but think of the old cheap things that were under $5, as cheap as they could come, and you squirt them around. If you're new to this business, your goal is to have, if you took that squirt gun and you sprayed it around your room, other than your monitors. By the way, don't do this. And if you ever do it, it's not my fault. Don't do it. Don't do this for real. Pretend you are shooting a squirt gun around that has water in it. If you have treatment above you, mine, if I sprayed it, it'll get absorbed by my acoustic panels that are sitting above me. I've got an acoustic panel sitting to the left of me. I actually have them to the right of me too. I also have foam, the acoustic panels behind me. Those are custom made panels that have that rock wool stuff inside of them. They have this inside of the little squares that are back there. That is an acoustic panel. That's an acoustic panel. Every one of those panels are just they're filled with this rock wool stuff. Soundproofing insulation. They're really just, and they cut the reflections in this room. I've got them above my head. I've got some foam, and I mix it up. I like some foam, some of those. Probably, I could live with 80% foam and 20%, but I don't have an exact percent. But I like multiples. I also like curtains if I can get away with it in some areas that are all scrunched up, whether that's pleated, so that they'll absorb at different levels, and that makes life pretty good. Okay. And then, so you're going to have some sort of foam or blankets or quilts or foam or sound panels around your room, because you need to absorb that. If you take one of those squirt guns and you spray it into your curtains or your quilt, you do not want it to splash back on you. Your ceiling's covered, your in front of you's covered, the walls are covered, and if you're in a closet, you can even put blankets and quilts behind the clothes that are there if you need more. I've done that in quite a few places where that was helpful. Okay, so the other thing we'll have is sometimes you end up with something that, hey, it doesn't matter what the wall treatment is. This room, somebody sent me this sample, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you this. First, I'll play it at regular levels, and then I'm going to turn it up so that I make sure that you can hear it. Okay, now let me turn that up. This is going to be obnoxious. Let me turn it up one more time. So hopefully you can hear that. Let me know if you can hear that little buzzy stuff going on there. You should be able to hear it. It looks like it's showing on my meters, but it's still quiet. You may have to turn that up a little bit. I just don't want to blow out anybody's ears. I can turn it up. But this was somebody sent me a sample. There's something electrical going on in their room. If you have RX, you can instantly see it, and if you know what to look for, I'm gonna take that out again. But you'll know that that it is definitely not that great. Okay. Now here's the other thing. If I just take a high pass filter and run that, it's going to knock out the very bottom one. So I knocked out the bottom one. So that's going to make it sound better to begin with. And that was all below the voice that was there. And then I'm going to take this right here, and there's more than one way to do it. But the first thing I'd be doing is taking spectral denoise and asking it to learn that. And I actually would cheat this, where I would go through and do a couple steps. Well, I take the worst of it right here and get rid of the worst of it first, and I would ask it to learn that. So what I want you to see here is, in just a minute, I'm going to check this. I'll render that out. That's a little bit too much, so I'll undo that. How do I know? Because I've seen it 1,000 times. We're going to just take out a little bit here and see what we get. There we go. Look at that. That's pretty nice. Okay, so I'm going to take that out. I'll undo that. I'm just going to take that out across the whole track, and you'll just see it'll be all gone, all the worst of it there. So that took out some of it. And then I'm going to do a secondary pass here and take out the rest of it, and I'll just kind of take right in here, and I will learn that. And in so doing, I'm going to render just to see what that looks like. Too dark for me. And so we're going to take this one because we started with less. I don't need to take out as much. And we'll see if we can get it all here. Oh, there's a much better situation. Okay. And then I'll run that there. And then what I've just done is in 2 steps, in 2 minutes, gone through and eliminated all that. And if I play, I'm going to amplify the same little region again. You can see visually it's dramatically better. And I'm going to cycle over this. And if I play it, basically you hear nothing, but that's not fair because last time I also had gained it up. And so I'm going to gain this up. I'll gain it up 20. And so that it still has some noise. But what you're going to hear is a very broadband noise. And it sounds like a fan, or it sounds like the ocean, or it sounds like simply, and I just have that turned up. I brought that up 20 dB, which is a crazy amount. I brought that up 20 dB. It's a crazy amount, but the hum is all gone. And so, in other words, that hum is sound. It is something that's distracting. It is something we do not want. And it's something that I'm able to gracefully take out. And there are other tools depending on the types of noise that somebody has and how much is in their audio and what we need to do about it. And there's a tool called Dialogue Isolate that's awesome in RX11. There's spectral denoise, there's voice denoise, there's a bunch of different denoisers. And when you combine good denoisers with well-treated rooms, you're going to use the denoisers at a very small amount to make a final polishing action potentially. And you may have to use some of the other tools that are in there, just depends on your starting space. But you're going to have very minimal denoisers because your room starts off good. And even in a worst case scenario, the good tools can take out all sorts of crazy amounts of things, including dog barks and stuff like that. And RX11 has some just absolutely killer tools for doing this, ranging from voice denoise, which is its simplest thing, to spectral denoise, and then finally dialogue isolate has its place. When you combine these 3 tools, you can take out noise in, I don't know, 95% of the cases. I did run across a room recently where somebody has something because of their condo complex and a neighbor that they have who is running a TV and running their gaming situation. And it is just almost, because of the proximity and because of how much it changes and how loud it was a really tough case. And I would have had to play with it for another hour to figure out, could I get rid of it 100%? Well, I certainly can manually. I certainly can go through and get rid of like 1 day's worth of stuff, but as an automated thing to just have something to do it all, it's really tough. And what that place would have needed was some better isolation, where we built a box within a box. We built our own floor, and we did what we had to do in Donnie's case, where we took something that an existing room, and we had to really beef it up so that then this person could record 24/7 type thing, no matter what the neighbor is doing. So sometimes that's what happens. And could it be soundproof? Nope. But we would take out, if we added enough mass, some other things that we can do there. So Dale saying, yeah, phone on speaker, can barely hear it. Yep. Well, that makes sense. It's totally makes sense that you wouldn't hear it very much. But as far as looking like a lot of harmonics going on, absolutely. This thing, this whatever they had, if I put it back to the original, it's a crazy amount. Here's the original. And then we go all the way to the end here. And then here's the same thing. And you can even see the little meters that are down here. It's basically unhearable. But point being, you can take that stuff out. In an ideal world, you don't. But if to build a room that would put up with that much hum, chances are there was something electrical going on in their world, and we had to find it and isolate it. And I pulled that sample. I can't remember if that was a year ago or 4 years ago. I have samples from a lot of different people on stuff when they had a problem. And, bottom line is we solved it, and we're able to take it out and save that recording, and then find whatever it was and get it out of the recording space. could have been a fan in another room, but that one was severe, so it's really too close to the mic and all sorts of things like that. So when somebody says they're soundproofing, translate for them. Don't beat them up. I mean, I try no longer to. In the old days, I used to be kind of militant about it. Oh, you can't soundproof. No, I just go, yeah, I know what they mean. They're not talking really. If they're new to the business, they're not talking about soundproof. So I might gently say to them, hey, I know you think, we're not going to soundproof. We're going to bring any external noises down to a minimum. We are going to reduce some sound as much as possible. It will not be perfect. It will not be soundproof. But even that, these guys, they understand that by using that word, because that's what people are going to search on, because that's common usage. I'm going to soundproof a room. I'm going to soundproof a bedroom. I'm going to soundproof whatever. Well, they're not, but that's okay. That's just, I can't fight every war on that. That's the word they're going to use. And especially if you go to the Home Depot site, the Lowe's site, and they're buying stuff that's for, quote, soundproofing. Well, it's sound reduction, but they don't want to say sound reduction. But that's what it is. Okay. So I hope that helps. And yeah, let's see what, yeah, buy that neighbor headphones. Boy, I didn't think of that. At least that's a good suggestion. That's actually a great suggestion. That may be a good solution in a place where, especially if you bought that person wireless headphones, I'll bet for $100, $150, you could get them a killer set of Bluetooth headphones. That's a really good idea. I wish I had thought of that. I'm going to take that. That's actually, I got to call that client and say that is a wonderful idea that I had not come up with, but I will steal it. Okay. That's a great idea. And that actually, if you did the right thing and talk, because I do know this is the funny thing. So I said, well, can you tell the neighbor what you do for a living, and do you have any sort of relation? They said, well, I've talked to him. He's, he keeps it down now, but even when he keeps it, quote, down to the levels that he likes, it's still too loud for recording. And what I didn't think of was that smart answer there of, buy that neighbor some Bluetooth headphones. That'd be a lot cheaper than building your own room. When we did Donnie's room, I don't think I still have that up here. Oh, I think I closed it. So when that's a couple $1,000s worth of investment when you look at all the details that we did for that room. We spent a few grand because just the insulated door that we put in, it was an outdoor door being used inside. I think the door itself was about $300. So 250, 300, something like that. And so, putting in a door, and that's a well insulated door. It is not a soundproof door. If you're really going for it, you end up with a double door with a space in between them that's about 4 to 6 inches of dead space. Is what anytime you go into a like a real recording studio, they almost always have doors that are double doors with a gap in between them of 4 to 6 inches, and they're heavy doors, and they close super tight, and they're highly insulated around the edges, and there's 2 of them, and they're thick and they're heavy, and they're still not perfect when you have a set of drums on the other side of them, or you have a screaming guitar on the other side of them, but they're pretty amazing how much sound that they will reduce or basically isolate. The isolation level is pretty high, but it's not perfect. Okay. So what you really should do is you can start with something simple. Try seeing what happens in your space if you use a blanket fort, and you can build a PVC frame, and that'll work. And I do talk about that in this Make Your Space Better, and have some examples of that, and blankets and quilts and things like that for building that. And then talking about isolation and foam and acoustic panels and things like that. So you can do that. You have a lot of options, but they're not free. And if you're on a super tight budget, then you have to be a lot more creative. But you can buy used blankets, you can get used quilts, and you can take a closet if you have it, and you can make it better. You can make almost any space better for very little money if you're willing to put up some little hooks and put blankets and quilts and things on the walls. and you can do that in a way that won't hurt the walls. You can make everything better, and you should, but understand that it's not the same. When you're doing blankets and quilts, it will not isolate from outside sound. If a truck drives by, if a car drives by, if a motorcycle drives by, if there's a train in the distance, an airplane, helicopter, heck, it could even be if there's a dog barking the next apartment or condo over, a lot of that'll get through. It's definitely won't, blankets will not deal with that. And but they will cut the reflections in your space, so they can be great for that. Okay. So I'm gonna look and see if anybody else has any other questions or comments. I hope this helps you out. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to post this wherever it makes sense. Tell other people about it. We're here every week. If you have a question, be sure to send me a message that says, hey, could you talk about X or Y? Excuse me. And then I'm happy to do that. And of course, I'll see you next week, and join me with the Baarns Heller Ask Us Anything, where we talk about audiobooks primarily. Have some great guests on that as well. And just tell other people about it. It's always helpful. And if you really like it, hey, you can send me one of those. You can even buy a coffee or something like that. There's a way to do that on YouTube. So hope you have a fantastic day. And as always, look forward to seeing you on the wires, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.